The thunder of hooves echoed across the track as the obsidian-coated stallion tore through the dust, sunlight glinting off his rippling muscles. In the VIP box of High Ridge Estate, 24-year-old oil heir Dorian Halstead watched coldly, fingers clenched around a high-stakes betting slip. This race wasn't just about money, it was about control. Then everything unraveled. In the final curve, the stallion stumbled. The lead was lost. Dorian's champion crossed the finish line in fourth place. A man who'd never heard the word no didn't take defeat lightly. His fist slammed into the stable wall, sending a ripple of fear through the other horses. "Useless! Filthy beast!" he snarled, sweat streaking through the dust on his face. His Italian suit creased from rage. From the shadowy end of the stable, Malcolm Rowan, once the estate's most respected horseman, watched in silence, heart heavy. He'd warned them. Weeks ago, the horse wasn't sound. But Dorian had shut down every voice that dared contradict him. "The losses were significant, sir," the estate manager whispered. "But we can recover next season." "Shut your mouth," Dorian hissed, eyes now fixed on the gasping stallion. Once sleek and commanding, the horse now stood trembling, his coat dulled by pain and effort. Something dark settled behind Dorian's eyes. "Take him to Black Hollow Marsh," he ordered. "Bury him in the mud, up to the neck. Leave the head above. That's what failures deserve." His voice had cooled to something far more dangerous than fury. And in the locked drawer of his suite at Crane Hill Manor, his journal told a chilling story. Vanderwaal broke down. Tempest did too. This will be the third. Nobody asks questions. Jasper still cooperates. He has too much to lose. The sun had barely risen when 12-year-old Silas Keene was already wandering the dusty roads of Willow Creek, New Mexico, calling for his missing dog. The pup had vanished the night before, and Silas hadn't slept a wink. Inside their modest kitchen, Ruth Rowan and her husband Malcolm exchanged worried glances. Since Dorian had automated High Ridge, replacing seasoned workers with machines, Malcolm had been jobless and hollowed by guilt. From the kitchen window, they could see the sprawling mansion atop Crane Hill, its lush lawns sucking down water while the town battled drought. Its glow never dimmed, even as Willow Creek suffered frequent blackouts. "Drink your milk, sweetheart," Ruth said gently, brushing Silas's hair. "Come back before noon if you don't find him." 2 hours later, Silas stumbled across tire tracks, slicing into the edge of Black Hollow Marsh, headed toward a forgotten area. Then he heard it, a faint whimper, a sound that didn't belong in the stillness of dawn. Following it, he climbed a low rise and froze. There, sunken deep in the black muck, was the estate's prize stallion, his head barely above the mud. His once bright eyes were clouded with fear and exhaustion. Silas approached slowly, remembering how his father taught him to calm nervous horses. "It's okay, champ. I'm here now." Silas knelt beside the massive head, whispering soft words. Gently, he unscrewed his water bottle and held it to the horse's cracked lips. The stallion drank greedily. "I'll come back with help. I promise." By the time Silas reached Willow Creek's central plaza, the sun was merciless. Gasping, he cried out, "There's a horse buried alive in the marsh. It's the champion from High Ridge, just his head sticking out." Skeptical townsfolk exchanged glances, until one man, Old Earl, 70 and unshakable, stepped forward. "My truck can take the marsh. Grab my tools, kid, we're going." Soon Ruth and Malcolm arrived, followed by more townspeople. Silas's mother hugged him tightly. Fiona Ellery, once an investigative journalist, now a teacher at the local school, knelt beside Silas. "You're sure it's the High Ridge stallion?" she asked, phone already recording. Her instincts were kicking in. The rescue party reached Black Hollow Marsh, the sun blazing down. The stallion whinnied weakly at the sight of Silas. That flicker of hope cracked open hearts. "Oh, Lord," Malcolm muttered, leaping from the truck. "We have to move fast and careful." As they began digging, he noticed the swelling in the horse's hind leg. "This injury's old." "That's why he fell." A bark rang out. "My dog!" Silas yelled, embracing his mutt Hopper, who immediately stood guard beside the horse. 2 hours of back-breaking effort later, they cleared a path. "Come on, champ," Silas whispered, and the stallion rose, bloody, shaky, but dignified. Fiona caught it all on camera. "This will show the world what happened here." Dr. Jasper Crane, the estate's vet, arrived holding a battered briefcase. "I can't carry this anymore," he confessed. "Dorian forced me to cover the injury, threatened my license. I have proof, recordings, signed orders. The footage spread like wildfire. News outlets, animal rights groups, national attention. When a corporate helicopter landed and Dorian Halstead, his father Victor Greaves, and their legal team stepped out, tension crackled in the air. "That horse is mine," Dorian shouted, lunging toward the animal. Hopper growled, stepping between them. "No, he's not," Silas said calmly. "You gave up that right when you tried to bury him alive." Victor Greaves took in the scene. Cameras, police, townsfolk, the broken stallion still standing, the diary in an officer's hand. For the first time in his life, he saw his son for who he truly was and what he had helped him become. When Dorian attempted to threaten the vet and was restrained live on air, it became a national symbol of accountability. "I always knew," Victor whispered, his shoulders slumping. "Yeah, but I thought money could fix everything." Reading Dorian's journal, he uncovered layers of troubling behavior. Horses pushed beyond limits, injuries concealed, staff silenced with threats. "Can I go with the horse?" Silas asked softly, as a vet team prepared to move the stallion to a clinic. Victor looked at him for a long moment. "You and your parents showed something today I could never teach my son. Integrity." He turned to Malcolm and Ruth. "I don't want to offer money. I want to offer something real. Help me turn High Ridge into a rescue sanctuary and run it." "Why us?" Malcolm asked, still wary. "Because your boy has something no Ivy League can teach, real love for these animals." Months later, New Dawn Sanctuary became a haven for injured and abandoned horses. Hydrotherapy, rehabilitation, education programs. Former High Ridge workers were rehired, their wisdom now honored. Silas, now the first student in the new handler program, helped design ways to gently reach traumatized animals. Vendaval and Tempest, located abroad, were flown back. When the once-buried stallion greeted them gently, almost explaining they were safe, even the vets were moved to tears. "It's extraordinary how they communicate," Fiona whispered, filming the moment for her documentary. "Laws changed. The Champions Act enforced animal welfare in sport with real consequences." Fiona's documentary won awards. Jasper now led the National Veterinary Ethics Board. Victor spent his remaining energy supporting causes he once ignored. Dorian, sentenced to psychological rehabilitation and mandatory service in animal shelters, resisted at first. But caring for the broken began to mend the broken in him too. Sunlight filtered through the new windows of the restored stable. New Dawn Sanctuary was completing its first year of operation, and the transformation was remarkable. Where once there had been ruthless competition and silent abuse, now an air of healing and cooperation prevailed. Silas, now 13, moved through the stable with a quiet confidence that pinched Ruth's heart whenever she watched him. Her son had discovered his purpose in a way many adults never would. "I think Shadow is ready to work with the children today," he said to Malcolm, adjusting the soft blanket over the black stallion's back. The horse, once buried in mud up to his neck, now responded to the name Shadow, a name chosen not to remember the darkness of his past, but to celebrate how even in the deepest shadows, hope could flourish. "You sure, son?" Malcolm asked, examining the horse's eyes. "The special needs kids are coming today. We need to be absolutely certain." Silas smiled and stroked the stallion's muscular neck. "He told me he's ready." Malcolm didn't question it. Over the past months, everyone had witnessed the unusual connection between the boy and the horse. It was as if they shared a language of their own, woven of pure instinct and trust. At the newly built Equine Therapy Center, 6 children with different needs waited in a semicircle, their faces lit with anticipation. Some were in wheelchairs, others struggled with invisible but equally significant challenges. Fiona was there as always, documenting the sanctuary's progress. Her initial documentary had evolved into an ongoing series about healing, both animal and human. She captured the moment as Silas led Shadow into the circle. "This is my friend Shadow," Silas said simply. He was like many of us, he was hurting and alone. But he discovered that sometimes we need to accept help to find our strength. A girl in a wheelchair, Clara, 8 years old, extended a hesitant hand. Shadow lowered his massive head and snuffled softly against her fingers, eliciting a surprised laugh. "He likes me," she exclaimed, the words coming with effort but full of joy. "Of course he does," Silas replied. "Shadow knows you're special." As the day's program progressed, Ruth and Dr. Jasper watched from the fence. "I never thought I'd see this," the veterinarian admitted, his eyes following the stallion's gentle, patient movements. This horse suffered enough to become dangerous forever. Ruth smiled. That's what happens when you trade punishment for patience. She didn't say it accusingly. Dr. Jasper had already made peace with his role in Shadow's suffering. His testimony against Dorian had cost him much. Threats, alienation from wealthy clients, sleepless nights, but he carried his shoulders lighter now. At the end of the day, when the children were gone and the sanctuary grew quiet, Silas and Fiona sat on the porch of the small family home, which had been rebuilt on the property. "How do you always know what the horses are thinking?" she asked, genuinely curious. Silas considered the question for a moment, his expression serious beyond his years. "I don't exactly know what they're thinking," he finally answered. "I know how they're feeling, and most feelings are universal, you know. Fear, trust, pain, joy. We don't need words for that." "That's a rare skill," Fiona observed. "I don't think it is," Silas countered. "I think we're all born knowing how to feel what others feel. We just forget as we grow up." That evening, as the family ate dinner, the phone rang. It was Dorian's social worker, asking if he could visit the sanctuary as part of his rehabilitation program. A heavy silence fell over the table. "Absolutely not," Malcolm said immediately, his eyes seeking Ruth's for confirmation. But it was Silas who spoke up. "I think he should come." His parents looked at him, surprised. "Son, you know what he did," Ruth began. "I know," Silas interrupted. "And he knows too. Maybe that's why he wants to come." The day of Dorian's visit dawned clear and cold, a light frost covering the fields. The sanctuary staff moved with tension in their shoulders. Everyone knew who was coming. Silas woke early and went straight to Shadow's stall. He sat in the fresh straw, leaned against the wooden wall and waited for the stallion to come to him. "Today's a hard day," he told the horse, who tilted his head as if he were actually listening. "The man who hurt you is coming. Not to hurt you again, but, well, I don't know why exactly." Shadow snorted and nudged Silas with his muzzle. "You're right," the boy smiled. "We'll find out." When the discreet car from the rehabilitation clinic drove through the gates, there was no reception committee, just Malcolm standing at the main entrance, arms crossed. Dorian stepped out of the back seat, almost unrecognizable to anyone who had known the arrogant heir before. Thinner, with deep circles under his eyes, he wore simple jeans and a flannel shirt. No designer labels, no ostentation. He didn't offer his hand in greeting. He knew it wouldn't be accepted. "Thank you for allowing this," he said, his voice devoid of the arrogance that had defined it before. "It was my son's decision," Malcolm replied coldly. "He believes in second chances." "He's wiser than I ever was," came the quiet response. Malcolm led Dorian through the sanctuary, showing the rehabilitation facilities, the therapy areas, the fields where horses rescued from terrible situations now ran freely. Dorian absorbed everything in silence, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. Finally, they reached a secluded field where Silas was sitting on a tree stump, Shadow grazing peacefully beside him. "He wanted to do this alone," Malcolm explained. "I'll be over at that fence if you need me." Dorian swallowed hard and nodded. He walked slowly across the field, stopping several yards away from the boy and horse. Shadow raised his head, nostrils flaring. Immediate recognition. "He remembers me," Dorian said, his voice shaky. "Horses never forget," Silas replied. "Neither the good nor the bad." "I shouldn't have come," Dorian muttered, taking a step back. "But you did," said Silas, finally looking at him. "Why?" The question hung in the cold morning air. Dorian closed his eyes for a moment as if searching for an answer within himself. "Because I need to know if it's possible," he finally answered. "If what is possible? Reparation? Forgiveness? I don't know. Something beyond this. Emptiness?" Silas considered this, then extended his hand to Shadow, who immediately came to his side. "You could have reported me that first day," Dorian continued. "You could have told everyone you saw me giving the order, but you didn't." "It wasn't about you," Silas said simply. "It was about him." He stroked Shadow's neck. "How's my father?" Dorian asked abruptly. "Good. He visits almost every week, brings carrots for the horses. I believe he's trying, like you." A sudden wind swept across the field, rippling the tall grass. Shadow moved, positioning himself between Silas and the breeze, as if shielding the boy. "You can come closer if you want," Silas offered. "Toddy won't hurt you." Dorian laughed without humor. It would be justified if he tried. Still, he took a step forward. Then another. Shadow watched, motionless but alert. "Talk to him," Silas instructed. Not about the past, about now. Dorian hesitated, then spoke, his voice soft and uncertain as no one had ever heard it before. I'm sorry. I don't know how to say that in a way that makes any difference after what I did, but I'm learning. With each animal I care for at the clinic, I'm learning. To both their surprise, Shadow extended his neck and snuffled softly, his warm breath visible in the cold air. "May I?" Dorian asked, extending a trembling hand. Silas nodded but added, "Slowly. Let him come to you." Dorian stood still, hand extended, breath held. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, with deliberate dignity, Shadow stepped forward and allowed Dorian's fingers to touch his muzzle. A single tear rolled down the young man's face, quickly followed by others. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "It's not about deserving," Silas replied. "It's about healing, and healing is a process, not a prize." Spring arrived in Willow Creek with an explosion of life. Wildflowers colored the fields of New Dawn Sanctuary, and the equine therapy program had expanded to serve children from 3 neighboring counties. Dorian had completed his rehabilitation program and, surprisingly, enrolled in veterinary school. He now visited the sanctuary regularly, not as the Halstead fortune heir, but as a volunteer, often performing the most humble tasks without complaint. The transformation hadn't been magical or instantaneous. There had been relapses, moments of frustration and anger rising to the surface, but something fundamental had changed in him. The need for absolute control had given way to something more complex, the desire for reparation. On a particularly glorious afternoon, the sanctuary was hosting a special event. 3 rescued horses, including Vanderval and Tempest, were ready for their graduation, the moment when they would be considered fully rehabilitated and available for adoption by approved homes. Families from all over the region came for the celebration, along with journalists, supporters, and even politicians. The Champions Act, inspired by Shadow's case, had been expanded to include broader protections for animals in sports. Victor Greaves, now a visibly softer, more present man, moved among the guests with a humility that would have been unthinkable before. Fiona, whose documentary about the sanctuary had inspired similar initiatives in other states, was filming the gathering for the final episode of her series. "Ready for the big moment?" Ruth asked Silas, adjusting his shirt collar. He nodded, his eyes fixed on a distant point where Shadow galloped freely with other horses. "I'm proud of you," she continued. "More than I can express." Silas smiled at his mother. "It's funny," he said. "It all started with something so terrible, and look what it became." "That's how it works sometimes," she replied. "The strongest seeds often grow in disturbed soil." The ceremony was simple but powerful. Malcolm spoke about the sanctuary's journey, about how each rescued animal had taught lessons in resilience and forgiveness. Dr. Jasper presented the 3 graduating horses, detailing their progress and specific needs. Then, to the surprise of many, Malcolm called Dorian to the improvised stage. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some still saw him only as the villain of the story. Dorian climbed onto the stage with visible hesitation, his hands clutching a piece of paper. "I didn't prepare a speech," he began, after a moment of tense silence. "Actually, I prepared several, but none seemed adequate." He took a deep breath. "I was someone who saw value only in what could be used, exploited, profited from. I treated living beings as property, as tools. When they broke, I discarded them." His voice trembled. "What I've learned here, what Silas, Malcolm, Ruth, and yes, Shadow himself taught me, is that our value isn't in our utility. It's in our simple existence, in the innate right to be treated with dignity." He folded the paper without consulting it. "Today I want to announce that I'm transferring the legal ownership of High Ridge Estate to an independent foundation, which will ensure that New Dawn Sanctuary continues its work for generations. And I'm creating a scholarship fund for young people who wish to pursue careers in animal welfare, in honor of Silas Keene, who, at 12 years old, showed more moral courage than I ever had." Applause erupted, mixed with some tears. Silas, red with embarrassment, accepted a hug from his mother. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the sun was beginning to set, Silas and Dorian walked together to the field, where Shadow rested under an ancient oak tree. "Do you think he's happy?" Dorian asked, watching the stallion. Silas considered the question with his usual seriousness. "I think he's at peace, which might be even better than happiness." "You're a wise kid." "I'm not wise," Silas countered. I just know how to listen." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the horse, who had now raised his head to watch them back. "He'll never be adopted, will he?" Dorian finally asked. Silas smiled. "He already has a home. This is his place. With us. And with the children," Dorian added. "I've seen the work he does with them. It's extraordinary." "Shadow understands pain," Silas explained. "And when you understand pain, you can help heal it in others." As the sky painted itself in shades of orange and purple, Shadow approached them, his coat gleaming in the golden light, with no visible traces of his terrible past. "Sometimes," Silas said, as he stroked the stallion's neck, "you have to lose something precious, to find something far more meaningful." He turned to Dorian and added, "Every horse here has a story of survival, even you, if you're ready to listen." Years later, New Dawn Sanctuary became legendary, not just for rescuing animals, but for healing the people who had failed them. And at its heart stood a boy who proved that strength is found in compassion, and that even the darkest soul, like a horse rising from the mud, can find its way back if someone refuses to give up on them. "You see, champ," Silas whispered as Shadow trotted over at sunset, "sometimes the most lost souls just need the right kind of love to find their way home." My friends, we've come to the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.